What if the man the world chose to voice God spent 50 years being treated like he didn't exist? What if the accident that shattered his hand was only the second worst thing that ever happened to him? And what if the granddaughter he loved more than fame itself died in the most brutal way imaginable, while he was too far away to save her? Stay with me, because this is the story Hollywood never told you about Morgan Freeman. And by the end, you'll never hear that voice the same way again. On June 1st, 1937, a boy was born in Memphis, Tennessee, who would one day be trusted to narrate the universe. But before the Oscars, before the voice, before the legend, there was a child so poor, so invisible, so deliberately crushed by the world around him, that survival itself was an achievement. Morgan Freeman grew up in Charleston, Mississippi, a tiny town where poverty wasn't a condition. It was the air everyone breathed. His grandmother's house had no electricity, no running water, no luxuries of any kind. He picked cotton under a merciless sun for pennies a day. He wore clothes stitched from flour sacks, and he walked miles to crumbling one-room schoolhouses while white children rode buses to well-funded schools with real books and real teachers. But racism in the Deep South wasn't just poverty. It was personal. It was the shopkeeper who refused to look him in the eye, the police officer who stopped him for walking on the wrong side of the street, the suffocating understanding that one wrong word, one wrong move could end in violence. As Morgan himself later admitted, "You learn to keep your head down. You learn to survive by becoming invisible." Then at age 9, almost by accident, everything changed. A school play, a makeshift stage, a small audience of parents and teachers. And the moment Morgan Freeman stepped into the light, something inside him shifted permanently. "I fell in love with acting that day," he would say decades later. "Not because of the attention, but because for the first time I felt like I mattered." For a boy the world had already decided to ignore, that feeling was everything. And it planted a seed that no amount of poverty, rejection, or racism could ever fully destroy. That single moment on a makeshift stage in Mississippi became the quiet foundation of one of the greatest careers the world would ever witness. Here's what nobody tells you about Morgan Freeman's rise to fame. There was no rise, not for 30 years. There was only falling and refusing to stop getting up. When he graduated high school in 1955, Hollywood felt as distant as the moon. Black actors in that era were relegated to servants, slaves, and stereotypes. So Morgan did what millions of young men did out of necessity. He joined the United States Air Force, served as a radar technician, hated every single day of it. "I thought the Air Force would give me discipline, direction," he later confessed. "Instead, it taught me what I didn't want to be." In 1959, at just 22 years old, he moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a duffel bag, a few dollars, and a dream everyone told him was impossible. The casting directors took one look and offered him the same tired roles. Bellhop, janitor, criminal, parts that didn't require a name, just a face to fill the background. He moved to New York, took any job he could find, danced in the chorus of the 1964 World's Fair, drove a taxi through Manhattan's chaotic streets, mentally rehearsing monologues in traffic. Every dollar went toward rent, food, and the faint hope that the next audition would be different. It never was. By 1971, Morgan was 34 years old and landed on a children's educational show called The Electric Company, playing a character named Easy Reader, who made reading cool for kids. For 5 years, he showed up and performed. He was beloved by kindergartners, invisible to Hollywood, and painfully aware of the difference. "I spent years being invisible on stage," he admitted. "Just like I was invisible back in Mississippi. Only now I was invisible by choice, and that made it worse." Those were the years that tested not just his patience but his identity. Every morning he woke up as an actor. Every night he went to sleep as a man the industry had quietly decided didn't matter. That kind of slow, grinding erasure doesn't just wound the career, it wounds the soul. Then in 1987, at age 50, everything cracked open. A small film called Street Smart cast him as Fast Black, a violent, dangerous, unpredictable pimp opposite Christopher Reeve. The performance was volcanic. And when the 1988 Oscar nominations were announced, after 3 decades of invisibility, Morgan Freeman's name appeared for the very first time. He didn't win. Sean Connery, took the statue for The Untouchables. But the nomination changed everything. The man Hollywood ignored for 30 years had finally been seen. The 1990s belong to Morgan Freeman in a way no decade had before. The Shawshank Redemption, Say 7N, Amistad, role after role that didn't just entertain, they endured. His voice, measured, weary, and always hopeful, became the soul of every story he touched. And then in 2005, at 67 years old, after 4 nominations spread across 17 years, Morgan Freeman finally held an Oscar in his hands. Best Supporting Actor for $1 Million Baby. His acceptance speech was brief, almost uncomfortable with the attention, but those who knew his story understood what that statue truly represented. Not just success, vindication, proof that the boy from Mississippi who was never supposed to matter, mattered more than anyone had imagined. But fate, it turns out, doesn't care about vindication. August 3, 2008. A dark rural highway in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi. The same state that once tried to erase him. Morgan was driving his 1997 Nissan Maxima along Highway 32 when the car veered off the road, flipped multiple times, and crumpled like paper. Rescuers found him trapped inside, unconscious and broken. The jaws of life had to cut through twisted metal to extract him. His left shoulder was shattered. Nerves in his arm were severed. And his hand, the one that had held that Oscar, was crushed beyond recognition. Surgeons worked through the night, and when Morgan finally woke, they told him plainly, his left hand would never fully function again. The compression glove he began wearing became permanent, a visible mark of fragility on a man the world viewed as invincible. And the nerve damage triggered something even more relentless: fibromyalgia, a chronic pain condition with no cure. It's a never-ending ache, he admitted years later. It follows me everywhere, every moment of every day. He kept working, because stopping meant surrendering. And Morgan Freeman had never surrendered to anything. If the accident broke his body, what happened on August 16, 2015 broke something deeper. Adina Hines was 33 years old. She was Morgan's step-granddaughter, the granddaughter of his first wife, Jeanette Adair Bradshaw, a young woman he had helped raise since childhood. To Morgan, she wasn't family in a formal sense. She was the little girl who used to sit in his lap, the young woman whose acting ambitions he nurtured, one of the few people who had known him before the fame, who loved him not as a legend but as Grandpa Morgan. That August night, outside her Washington Heights apartment, her boyfriend, Lamar Davenport, stabbed her 16 times. Witnesses screamed for him to stop. He didn't. When police arrived, he was still standing over her body, muttering about exorcising demons. Adina was rushed to Harlem Hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Morgan was in Mississippi when he received the C. Friends later said he collapsed, physically unable to process the words being spoken to him. He flew to New York immediately, arriving to police tape, crime scene investigators, and his granddaughter's blood still staining the sidewalk. No award, no legacy, no amount of wisdom accumulated over 8 decades could have prepared him for that moment. He was simply a grandfather, standing where his granddaughter had taken her last breath. He released a statement through his publicist. The world will never know her artistry and talent and how much she had to offer. The words were composed, dignified, appropriate, but those who saw him in the days after described a man who was hollowed out, moving through motions because stopping meant confronting the unbearable. In May 2018, Lamar Davenport was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. For Morgan, the verdict felt like a second betrayal. 20 years for 16 stab wounds. 20 years for extinguishing a life that had barely begun. In 2025, Morgan Freeman is 87 years old. The compression glove remains. The fibromyalgia persists. The left hand that once held an Oscar still hangs mostly useless at his side. He spends most of his time on his 124-acre Mississippi ranch, the same state that once tried to make him invisible, now tending to 26 beehives in quiet solitude. Bees don't care about Oscars, he said simply. They just want you to be present. His story was never about perfection. It was about a boy born into segregation who refused to stay invisible. An actor rejected for 30 years who kept showing up. A man broken by accident, by grief, by accusation, who kept breathing anyway. He didn't get his first Oscar nomination until 50. Didn't win until 67. And the granddaughter he loved most was taken from him at 78. Long after any amount of success could shield him from loss. The pain never left. The glove never came off. The grief never fully lifted. And yet, every single morning, Morgan Freeman chose to keep going. Not because life was fair, but because quitting was never something the boy from Mississippi knew how to do. Morgan Freeman taught us that greatness doesn't protect you from tragedy. It just gives you a voice worth listening to while you carry it.